Hello, I'm Bob Harris. Welcome to Duraman's educational series for industrial and decorative concrete flooring systems. Duraman often receives phone calls from clients wanting a concrete floor in which a gypsum-based self-leveling product has already been installed. Typically, gypsum-based products are used in high-rise apartments, condominiums for really two reasons. One is for leveling the floors, perhaps they're out of level, but also for sound abatement. What that means is there's a sound deafening, so it really kind of reduces the sound as opposed to a straight concrete floor. So a couple considerations if you're going to have a Duraman concrete floor over a gypsum-based product is the PSI of the gypsum-based product needs to be a minimum of 3,500 PSI. So if you're specifying a project in which gypsum is being used, make sure that you specify that minimum requirement, 3,500 PSI. What if the floor is already down and you don't know what the actual PSI is? Unfortunately, you would have to actually obtain a core specimen, literally core into the floor, have an independent testing lab, do a compressive strength. That's one of the keys to having a Duraman concrete floor is the compressive strength of the gypsum. So this gypsum has already been poured. It's 3,500 PSI. We're getting ready to put CP 1000 primer down in preparation for our Skraffino, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But prior to putting the CP 1000 down, we always want to sand the floor. So you can see we have our buffing machine right here, and we actually sanded the floor with a 100 grit sanding screen. So this pad is attached to this buffing pad, and then we take our buffing machine and actually sand the floor, vacuum and damp mop all of the residual particulate off of the floor. So it's clean and ready. So the next step is going to be for us to apply our CP 1000 primer. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and prime. There's a couple of ways that you can prime it with the product. You can actually spray apply it and then back roll. You can simply dump some on the floor and back roll, or oftentimes applicators will dump it on the floor and take a push broom and broom it around. Now generally you come back, you let that dry, you come back the next morning while you're setting up your mixing station, and you apply a second coat of the CP 1000. And once that is tack free, meaning there's no visible wet spots in the primer, you're ready to go with the Skraffino application. Now the key to the Skraffino is you're going to always want to apply your first coat with what's referred to as the regular, which you can get in both gray and or white. So you're going to always start with we'll call it a body coat, if you will, of the Skraffino regular. That has a little bit of a heavier sand. It's going to give you some substance and produce an actual good wear surface. So over the first coat of the Skraffino, you can, if you choose to, come back, sand it off, make sure there's no trowel ridges or any marks in the floor, and come back with Skraffino fine. And if you really want a smooth, super fine floor, you would sand the second coat of fine, followed by a third coat of super fine. Professional applicators kind of have different scenarios of how they use this product. They always start with your base coat of regular, but some will then take super fine and mix a 50-50 blend. It's really up to the independent applicator of what he or she is trying to achieve. In terms of coloring, you have many options. You can use a color fast product. Right here, you can mix the color fast pigment into the actual mixture of the Skraffino. You can actually broadcast into the wet Skraffino and hand trowel that to get some marbleizing effects. And you can also use Duraman dyes, Deso dyes, as you see here, after the fact. So once the material is already down and cured, you can come back to create a tint, as we call it, or change the color of the floor. Maybe it's just a quick highlight using the Deso dyes. In terms of applying the Skraffino, there's a multitude of different application methods. A lot of people prefer what's referred to as a magic trowel. You see here, and they'll just put the material down with a magic trowel. You can use a traditional hand trowel. The key is to have a very organic trowel pattern. You don't want to see half arcs or half moons. You want to be very organic in the way that you put it down. If you do happen to create texture, it needs to look organic as opposed to contrived. Okay, we're applying our first application of CP 1000 primer over our gypsum-based self-leveling overlay that's previously been installed in preparation for our Skraffino application. Just a quick recap. Today, our first coat of CP1000 will go down. We'll come back the following morning and apply our second coat of the CP1000. While that second coat is drying, we'll go ahead and set up our mixing station and get prepared for the mixing of our Skraffino application. One general observation is typically gypsum-based products are very, very porous and absorbent. And one of the things that I'm noticing here is our first coat is just sucking right in. Meaning it's absorbing so quickly. So in this case, what we'll do is it's a good idea to put a second coat down, perhaps 1 hour after this first coat has dried, and then come back the following day with your third coat like we discussed. All right, the goal on our gypsum panel is to produce a concrete looking like floor. And so to recap, what we did yesterday is we applied our first coat of CP1000 primer. Minimum of 10 hours in our case. We came back the next morning today and we're applying our second application of CP1000 primer. You on a large job can put it in a pump up sprayer and you can spray it down for more volume, always followed by a quick back roll. Here I'm working in a really small area, so all I'm going to do is pour some out on the floor and I'm just going to roll on our second coat. You don't need to wait hours. Just as soon as this CP1000 has lost its tack, where you can get back out on it and not feel any tackiness, or certainly there's no wet spots, you're ready to go with your first application of Skraffino. On our gypsum panel, to recap, we started with a coat of CP1000. We let that dry overnight. It's always a minimum of 10-hour dry time, so usually that's come back the next morning. We followed up with a second coat of CP1000. It's now dry. There's no tackiness to it, and we're ready to apply our first application of Skraffino Gray Regular over the top of the gypsum underlayment. So we are using CP1000 as our catalyst, and we've already weighed it out in this bucket that you see here. And it's 4.6 liters of CP1000 that mixes to 1 unit of Skraffino. So you're going to always pour your liquid into the bucket first. Now, as an option, if you chose to, you could color or tint this mix. So you have color fast pigments right here, and there's over 30 different standard colors to choose from, so it gives you a wide range of opportunity in terms of color selection. And you can use varying degrees of pigment loads, from 1/8 of a cup all the way up to 2 cups. And generally what you would do is you would take whatever your desired pigment load is, take a scoop, put it into the CP1000, and then go ahead and mix it before you add the Skraffino into the mix. But we're going to be applying all 3 layers here, meaning we're going to go with Skraffino Gray Regular, Skraffino Fine, and then Super Fine. So we're not going to tint this first layer because we're putting additional layers over the top. So you're going to want to mix for 3 minutes. Make sure it's a consistent mix, clump-free. You don't want any clumps out on the floor. And after I mix it, I'll demonstrate on how you put it down. It's really up to the independent applicator, how he or she chooses to put it down. You can use a traditional steel trowel, or in our case, we're going to use a magic trowel to put it down. Always wear protection, wear non-absorbent gloves, and a dust mask. You'll have airborne particulate or silica going airborne, so you want to protect yourself from that. We've thoroughly mixed our Skraffino gray regular for 3 minutes, and we're going to apply it. Now, you don't want to dump a whole bucket on the floor. You're just going to dump small amounts because it's this material goes a long ways, and I don't want to have to carry a whole wave of material back with me. So you just dump small amounts to get started here. You can see the angle in which I'm using the magic trowel here. So for starters, I just want to lay a nice layer out, consistent layer. And then I'll go back after I get it dispersed out onto the floor, and I'll refine it. And I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. You see how I always keep my magic trowel clean? Now, I'm going to go ahead, clean it, go back out, do one last little, just to lay it down so there's no trowel marks. Every time I clean my trowel, I'm actually applying more pressure here than I am over here as to feather edges. You see I'm using very organic overlapping motions here. I'm always looking back to make sure I don't have any bad trowel ridges. And you'll notice I'm never going to reach right out. Like if I had a problem out there, I would never come over here and give it that scenario because I just created another problem. So I'm always starting from over here, fixing the problem, and coming this way.